On September 25, 1981, at around 4 p.m. was the last time Thelma Polly Melton was last seen. Polly and her friends went hiking daily, weather permitting. Since the afternoon was beautiful, Polly and her longtime friends decided to go on their usual hike before dinner. Before she left for her hike, she did everything as normal. She got spaghetti ingredients ready to have with her husband Bob later that evening when she returned. After getting everything ready, she set out with her friends. They explained that nothing seemed out of the ordinary during the walk. They gave each other a hard time, laughed, and just enjoyed the walk. When her friends realized Polly was walking slower than she usually would, they teased her about it. This resulted in Polly speeding up to prove a point and passing them. They laughed, but when she got to about 75 yards ahead of them, she walked over a hill and out of their sight. This wasn't a big deal to her friends, since this was a normal hike and they figured she would be waiting for them when they caught up. Unfortunately, seeing her ahead of them was the very last time she would be seen by anyone. Strangely enough, when her friends Trula and Red hiked the same hill that Polly had, she was nowhere to be seen. They figured she had just gone home to Bob to start dinner. When they arrived to Polly and Bob's camper, they learned that Bob hadn't seen her since she left to go hiking with them that afternoon. Her husband Bob began calling anyone who might have seen her or know where she might be. Unfortunately, this led to no results. That evening, Trula and Red told their husbands that during the hike, Polly had gone missing. The husbands immediately went to the Deep Creek Trail and retraced the same exact route they did during the hike, but found absolutely nothing. They questioned every hiker they saw on the trail, but every single one said they didn't notice a woman matching Polly's description that day. At 6 p.m., just 2 hours later, Polly Melton was reported missing. Over the course of an entire week, a search team of 150 people and 9 search dogs would look for Polly. They covered just around 100 miles of trail, creek, and forest. Of all that ground covered, there were no signs of struggle or of that anyone even left the path where Polly just vanished. The only clue they had during the entirety of the search was that search dogs caught her scent next to a tree off the trail. Park rangers just believed it's likely that Polly stopped to rest there for a minute and wasn't a significant clue. Her friends and family, though, were absolutely certain that Polly wouldn't have left the trail because she was terrified of snakes. So, on October 2nd, 1981, the Deep Creek Park officials told the press that evidence suggested Polly exited the park in a vehicle, probably of her own free will. There was no evidence of the vehicle, though, and even if there was proof, it has never been released to the public. If she did leave in a strange vehicle, why did she leave, and who did she leave with? The Polly Melton case had quickly gone cold due to a lack of leads. That is, until a year later something strange happened. On April 14, 1982, a check made out to Polly was cashed at the Birmingham Trust National Bank in Alabama. It's worth noting that she had gone missing all the way in North Carolina, but this check was cashed in Alabama. After the cashing of the check, authorities went to the bank, and the bank teller had no recollection of the person who cashed the check and couldn't even provide a description of the individual. Strangely, the person's identity is still a mystery. Rumors began to circulate after this incident that Polly had actually ran away and was still alive. Since the disappearance of Thelma Polly Melton, there have been numerous eyewitness sightings from Florida to Alabama and many other states, but none could be substantiated. So what actually happened to Thelma Polly Melton? How did she mysteriously vanish just 75 yards ahead of her friends? In May of 2000, a New York-based travel writer, Claudia Kirschhock, and her friend Tanya found themselves stranded in Jamaica. Their original plan was to go to Cuba for business, but for some reason the trip had been suddenly canceled. Both writers were concerned that the trip to Cuba had been canceled because not only were they told they couldn't go to Cuba, but they were also told they couldn't get back home to New York. Being that they were both stranded, Claudia, just 29 years old at the time, decided to make the most of her trip in Jamaica. During their stay, Claudia made friends with one of the resort's bartenders, Anthony Grant. While visiting the bar, she mentioned that she was a big fan of reggae music, and at this time, Grant reportedly offered to take her to a local club. The next day, Claudia and her friend Tanya ate breakfast. They both were finally able to book flights back home to New York, but Claudia decided to extend her trip and agreed to meet back in New York. After breakfast, Claudia decided to take a walk on the beach, away from the resort, and that was the last time she was seen or heard from. It was reported that a lifeguard was the last person to see Claudia walking on the beach. At this time, Claudia's parents were notified that she hadn't shown up for work as scheduled. When they finally reached someone at the resort, it was also reported that hotel maids had reported Claudia missing after noticing she had not slept in her bed for several days, even though nothing seemed out of the ordinary in her room. All of her clothes were packed away, her credit cards, cell phone, and cash were even in the room's safe where she left them. Once her parents arrived in Jamaica, their attempts to find out what exactly happened to their daughter hit one dead end after another. The resort wasn't helping, and as a security precaution, the license plates of all vehicles entering and leaving the resort were carefully recorded in a logbook, but that exact logbook all of a sudden went missing. What's even more strange is that the surveillance camera mounted near Claudia's room had been recorded over. Even the room where Claudia stayed in was cleared by housekeeping and hotel security before it could be processed as a crime scene for clues. Her parents became frustrated by the progress of the investigation and decided to bring in the FBI. According to a canine handler on the case, his dog tracked Claudia's scent to the home of Anthony Grant, the bartender from the resort. At his home, the dog hid on a pair of boots, gloves, and even a knife. While searching his car, the dog caught Claudia's scent in the backseat and the trunk. Anthony Grant was investigated and polygraphed, but the results turned inconclusive and wasn't considered a suspect. Many Cuba residents in the town of Negril believe that Claudia chose to run away from her old life. A detective on the case even received several phone calls from eyewitnesses who claimed to have seen Claudia in the hills with a Rastafarian man. However, each and every lead for detectives proved to be fruitless. So, what exactly happened to Claudia Kershak? Why was her room swiped clean before the investigation started? Why was the surveillance camera recorded over next to her room? Brian Schaffer, a medical student at Ohio State University, had just finished up a half of a semester in the spring of 2006. On March 31st, on a Friday, classes had just ended at Ohio State, and Brian was excited to get his spring break started. Just after midnight, during the early morning of Saturday, just after midnight, was the last time anyone ever saw Brian. On Friday night, Brian and his father went out to dinner together. His dad noted that Brian seemed exhausted after pulling all-nighters earlier during the week cramming for important exams. He figured the last thing on Brian's mind was to go out, but later that night he went out with a friend, William Clint Florence. At around 9 p.m., Brian met with Clint at a bar called the Ugly Tuma Saloona, which was located in the South Campus Gateway complex on High Street in Columbus, Ohio. At around 10 p.m., while the pair were out partying, Brian called his girlfriend. Reports said that it was a normal conversation, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. What he was doing, who he was with, and where he was. After the phone call, and just after midnight, Brian and William Clint Florence met with someone named Meredith Reed, a friend of William's. Meredith Reed ended up giving them a ride back to the Ugly Tuma Saloona and joined them for a last round of drinks. While all three were there, Brian Schaffer separated from the two friends. When it was time to leave, Florence and Reed attempted to find Brian. Since there was only one way in and one way out, once the bar closed at 2 a.m., they waited for Brian outside. When everyone emptied from the bar, Brian wasn't there, so they just assumed he went back to his apartment without letting any of them know. Both Brian's girlfriend and his father tried to call him later that weekend, but there was no answer. Then, on Monday morning, when he was supposed to fly to Miami with his girlfriend for spring break, he missed his flight. It was at this time Brian was reported missing to the Columbus police. Police began their search for Brian at the Ugly Tuna Saloon where he was last seen. They reviewed security footage, and it showed that Brian, William, and Reed were going up an escalator to the bar's main entrance at around 1:15 a.m. Schaffer was seen outside of the bar talking with two young women 40 minutes later. He was shown moving off camera in the direction of the bar, possibly to re-enter, but the camera didn't catch him leaving afterwards. Investigators theorized that it could have been possible that Brian changed clothes in the bar or put on a hat and kept his head down, hiding his face from the camera. It's also possible that the camera just missed Brian on the way out. After not finding anything at the bar, investigators searched miles away from the bar and began to consider the possibility that Brian had gone away temporarily to grieve the death of his mother in solitude. But no evident reasons appeared for him voluntarily disappearing. The last people to see Brian that evening were asked to take a lie detector test. Brian's father and Meredith Reed passed, but reportedly William Clint Florence refused to even take one. Rumors began to swirl, and it was believed that William Clint Florence might have had something to do with Brian's disappearance, but according to investigators, there was no evidence of that. Another theory, which was disputed and rejected by law enforcement, was that Brian could have been a victim of the smiley face murders. In 2019, there was an image of a homeless man in Tijuana bearing a resemblance to Brian Schaffer, but the FBI ruled it out. In 2014, Columbus police said they have 3 theories about the case but declined to discuss them. What happened to Brian Schaffer, and how could he have just vanished without a trace with one way into a bar and one way out?